On November 18, 1942, above Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, the hands of a Japanese Zero pilot gripped his control stick as he saw the odd, twin-boomed American fighters rising from the airfield. On that day, pilots from the 339th Fighter Squadron were the first to attack Japanese fighters with the Lightning, a key moment that would break Japanese beliefs about their power in the air. Twin engines, twin tails, climbing like nothing we've ever seen, he would later tell his commander back at Rabaul. These words showed the first doubts in 3 years of Japanese air dominance. Through his cockpit window, he had just seen something that went against everything he had been taught. American P-38 Lightning fighters, those strange twin-tailed planes that Japanese intelligence had brushed off as heavy and slow, had climbed from the ground to fighting altitude faster than his Mitsubishi A6M Zero. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from, and if stories of heroes appearing in the darkest hour thrill you, then hit subscribe, because we're just getting started. In China, the Philippines, and over Pearl Harbor, the Zero had ruled the skies. No Allied fighter could match its climbing speed or agility. But here, over this war-torn island, American pilots and their twin-engine fighters were controlling the fight from heights the Zero could barely reach. The P-38s from the 339th Fighter Squadron took down 3 Japanese planes in this first battle, attacking from above, which made the Zero's famous turning ability useless. The math of air power was being changed, not by old fighting rules, but by the simple fact of better high-altitude performance that would soon destroy every belief Japanese pilots had about being unbeatable, their planes, and their enemy. The rising sun's confidence. The fall of Japanese air power had started long before that November day, though no one in the Imperial Japanese Navy would have accepted it. Since December 7, 1941, Japanese Navy pilots had swept across the Pacific with a feeling of being unbeatable. The Mitsubishi A6M Zero, with its amazing range, quick turning, and skilled pilots, had earned a scary name. The Zero's top speed of 332 mph at its best altitude was impressive, and its skill at turning inside any Allied fighter made it lethal in classic dogfights. Among the top pilots was Petty Officer First Class Saburo Sakai, a winner of many battles, a veteran of the China War, and a survivor of numerous fights. By 1942, Sakai had won 13 victories in the Borneo fight alone before moving to Lae, New Guinea, where he would get most of his 64 claimed victories. His confidence, like that of his fellow pilots, was complete. Lieutenant Junichi Sasai, Sakai's direct superior, had told his pilots before missions, "The American fighters over the Guadalcanal area are known to have come from aircraft carriers supporting the invasion. They are probably regular American Navy fighters, not Army planes." The Japanese pilots thought they would face carrier-based F-4F Wildcats, planes they had beaten before. The first few months of 1942 seemed to prove Japanese strength. Japanese pilots shot down outdated Brewster Buffaloes over Singapore, wiped out Curtiss P-40 Warhawks over Java, and pushed aside British Hurricanes over Burma. The Zero had almost total control in the Pacific at first. Even when fighting newer Allied planes, Japanese pilots kept their mental edge through better training and tactics perfected over years of fighting in China. But intelligence reports reaching Japanese squadrons in mid-1942 mentioned a new American fighter, something different. Twin engines, twin tails, heavy guns, all in the nose. These reports were ignored by most squadron leaders. How could a twin-engine fighter possibly challenge the nimble Zero? Japanese Navy thinking, built on the idea of a single great battle and individual fighting skill, had no way to understand what was on the horizon. The Lightning appears. The P-38 Lightning was the only truly successful twin-engine day fighter of the war. It was created by Lockheed in response to a 1937 U.S. Army Air Corps request for a long-range interceptor. Designer Clarence Kelly Johnson and his group had made something never seen before. A fighter that could fly faster than 400 mph, climb to 40,000 feet, and carry enough fuel for trips over 1,000 miles. The P-38's twin Allison V1710 engines, each making 1,150 horsepower with turbo-supercharging, gave it abilities that seemed impossible to Japanese engineers. While the Zero was designed for maximum agility with minimum weight, even missing armor and self-sealing, fuel tanks in early versions, the Lightning followed a different idea entirely: speed, altitude, firepower, and the ability to survive. The first P-38s showed up in the Pacific not with celebration, but with mechanical troubles. When the first P-38s got to Australia, they were found to have some design flaws, and their first use in combat was put on hold. But by late 1942, these problems were being fixed, and skilled pilots from P-40 squadrons were moving to the new fighter. The 49th Fighter Group was still using P-40s, but would soon switch to the Lightning. These pilots brought with them hard-earned experience against Japanese planes. They had learned, often the hard way, never to get into a turning fight with a Zero. The P-38 would give them the means to fight on their own terms. November 18, 1942, was the Lightning's first big fight with Japanese fighters when pilots of the 339th Fighter Squadron, flying from Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, fought Japanese planes while protecting Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress bombers. The outcome shocked both sides. Japanese pilots guarding their bombers first saw the strange twin-tailed shapes rising from the south. Their first thought was confusion. Were these bombers or recon planes? Their climb rate suggested neither. By the time they saw they were fighters, the P-38s already had a 5,000-foot height advantage. The P-38s would patrol above the height at which the Zero could fight well. Their great speed at high altitudes let them get into the best positions. Then the big fighters would dive from the sky to hit the helpless Zero fighters. The numbers were clear. While the Zero's low-speed turning was famous, its high-speed movement was actually not as good as the P-38s at altitude. Above 250 mph, the Zero's controls got heavier. Above 300 mph, the plane was hard to move at all. The P-38, with its power-assisted controls in later models, stayed effective even in high-speed dives near 500 mph. The shock for Japanese pilots was more than just performance numbers. The P-38 showed a totally different way of air fighting that Japanese military thinking had not expected. The Lightning's weapons, 4 50-caliber machine guns and one 20mm cannon all in the nose, delivered a powerful, focused stream of fire that didn't need the difficult gun-aiming math of wing-mounted guns. The turbo-supercharged engines were just as groundbreaking to the Japanese. The P-38's turbo-superchargers made it one of the first Allied fighters that could perform well at high altitudes while also quieting the exhaust, making the P-38's approach fairly quiet. Japanese pilots often didn't hear the P-38s coming until it was too late. The Zero's Nakajima Sakai engine, making 950 horsepower at sea level, lost power quickly with height. By 20,000 feet, it was making barely 750 horsepower. The P-38's turbo-supercharged Allisons kept their power output to much greater heights, giving them a huge upper hand in the vertical part of air combat. The shock for Japanese pilots was more than just performance numbers. The P-38 showed a totally different way of air fighting that Japanese military thinking had not expected. The Lightning's weapons, 4 50-caliber machine guns and one 20mm cannon all in the nose, delivered a powerful, focused stream of fire that didn't need the difficult gun-aiming math of wing-mounted guns. The turbo-supercharged engines were just as groundbreaking to the Japanese. The P-38's turbo-superchargers made it one of the first Allied fighters that could perform well at high altitudes while also quieting the exhaust, making the P-38's approach fairly quiet. Japanese pilots often didn't hear the P-38s coming until it was too late. The Zero's Nakajima Sakai engine, making 950 horsepower at sea level, lost power quickly with height. By 20,000 feet, it was making barely 750 horsepower. The P-38's turbo-supercharged Allisons kept their power output to much greater heights, giving them a huge upper hand in the vertical part of air combat. By early 1943, the mental toll on Japanese pilots was showing up in squadron reports and private letters. The legend of the Zero's unbeatable nature, carefully built since the plane's first appearance in China, was falling apart. Japanese pilots talked about constant stress, knowing a P-38 could attack from anywhere. Lieutenant Commander Tadashi Nakajima faced what would become a well-known 2-on-1 tactic from the enemy. 2 Wildcats attacked the commander's plane. He had no problem getting on the tail of one, but never got a chance to shoot before the other Grumman roared at him from the side. Nakajima was furious when he returned to Rabaul. He had been made to dive and run for safety. This experience with Wildcats was nothing, next to what the P-38 would bring. Saburo Sakai himself would later say it was no longer possible for the Zero fighters to successfully fight the P-38s except in the most special situations, which sadly rarely happened. This statement from Japan's most famous ace had a huge impact on the pilot community. The tactical situation was even worse than the individual fight numbers showed. The P-38's range meant it could show up anywhere across the huge Pacific. With a range of 1,600 miles thanks to extra fuel tanks, the Lightning could guard bombers deep into Japanese land or conduct fighter sweeps far from American bases. Japanese pilots could no longer rely on having more planes over their own land. Nothing showed the P-38's strength more clearly than Operation Vengeance on April 18, 1943. When 16 P-38s flew a 435-mile mission to stop and shoot down Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. The mission needed exact navigation over water, very long range, and the skill to fight both bombers and fighter escorts. Major John Mitchell led the mission, with the planes flying just 50 feet above the ocean to stay off radar, then climbing fast to attack height. The mental blow to Japanese naval aviation was crushing. Their most respected leader, traveling with 6 Zero escorts, had been hunted down and killed by American fighters working at the very edge of their range. Zero pilot Kenji Yanaga, who was in Yamamoto's fighter escort, saw the attack. His account showed the shock of the Japanese pilots at the P-38's abilities. The Lightning pilots had come from nowhere, carried out their attack perfectly, and got away before the Zero escorts could do much. The American pilots had planned the attack down to the minute, showing up exactly when Yamamoto's flight was most open to attack as it was coming down to land. This level of planning, along with the P-38's performance, showed abilities Japan simply could not equal. As 1943 went on, American pilots perfected their tactics to make the most of the P-38's strengths. The boom and zoom attack, diving from a height, shooting, then climbing away before the enemy could react, became the standard way to fight. Japanese pilots found themselves helpless against these tactics. The first air-to-air fight between the Japanese and the P-38 ended with 15 Japanese planes shot down for only 1 P-38 lost. These one-sided wins became more and more common as American pilots got better with their new planes. The Japanese tried different ways to fight back. They tried using dive brakes to make P-38s overshoot them. They tried to trick P-38s into low-altitude turning fights. They even created new, looser formations to better see incoming attacks. Nothing worked all the time. The performance difference was just too great. The P-38's strength was a sign of a deeper truth about American factory power that Japanese pilots were just starting to see. By the end of the war, over 10,000 P-38s would be made, with 18 different models showing they were always getting better. Each new version fixed weak spots and improved strengths based on what was learned in battle. The P-38J model, which arrived in late 1943, added power-assisted ailerons to improve roll speed, fixed cockpit heating problems that had bothered earlier models in Europe, and had better turbo-superchargers for even greater high-altitude performance. Japanese airplane development, on the other hand, had trouble making small improvements to the Zero design. Captain Minoru Genda, the tactical planner behind the Pearl Harbor attack, privately told co-workers in mid-1943, "We are not just facing a better fighter. We are facing a system of always getting better that we cannot match. Each new American fighter we see is better than the one before." The technology gap grew wider because of the different quality of pilots. By mid-1943, Japan was losing its skilled pilots faster than they could be replaced. The harsh reality of Japan being unable to replace its war losses in materials and skill was becoming clear. Training programs were cut from 2 years to less than 6 months. New pilots came to combat units with less than 200 hours of flying time. American pilots, on the other hand, were arriving with 400 to 600 hours of training. They had practiced fighting tactics in advanced training groups, watched gun camera videos from real fights, and trained in different kinds of planes. When they moved to P-38s, they got special training in twin-engine flying and high-altitude fighting tactics. The P-38's twin-engine design offered another benefit that Japanese pilots hadn't fully understood: survivability. With two engines, even badly damaged Lightnings could limp home on a single engine. The mental effect of this reliability was huge. Japanese pilots flying single-engine planes over vast oceans faced death if their engine quit. The Zero's very long range was achieved by having little armor and no self-sealing fuel tanks. A single bullet in the wrong spot meant a fiery death or a long swim in shark-filled waters. By late 1943, Japanese intelligence was telling pilots to stay away from fights with the Lightning, pointing out its scary diving speed, accuracy, and ability to appear out of nowhere. These intelligence reports, passed around Japanese squadrons, showed a growing awareness of their disadvantage. A captured Japanese paper from December 1943 said, "The P-38 type fighter must be seen as the most dangerous American plane in the Pacific. Its speed and climb rate are better than anything we have. Fighting should be avoided unless you have many more planes and a better position." This admission that Japanese pilots should avoid fighting American fighters was a complete turnaround from the warrior code that had defined Japanese naval aviation. The mental blow was crushing. Pilots trained to seek battle at every chance were now being told to run from the enemy. The rise of American P-38 aces gave clear proof of the fighter's strength. Major Richard Dick Bong became America's top-scoring ace with 40 victories, all in P-38s. Major Thomas B. McGuire got 38 victories before he was killed in January 1945. These numbers, reached in less than 2 years of fighting, were more than what most Japanese aces had achieved in 3 or 4 years of war. Over 1,800 Japanese planes would be shot down by P-38s in the Pacific. This count was not just about planes destroyed, but also skilled pilots lost, pilots Japan could never replace. Each victory weakened Japanese air power more and more as training programs struggled to produce even basic replacements. As 1944 went on, the P-38 kept getting better while Japanese plane development fell behind. The P-38L model had upgraded engines making even more power at height, better cooling systems, and rocket launchers for ground attack missions. These planes could carry large bomb loads in addition to their regular guns. Japanese pilots watching P-38s change from air superiority missions to devastating ground attacks knew they were facing not just a better fighter, but a weapons system with unmatched flexibility. Besides the better technology, Japanese pilots had a hard time understanding the American way of air combat. The Japanese had turned air fighting into an art, focusing on individual skill and warrior spirit. The Americans saw it as an engineering puzzle to be solved with better technology and tactics. Commander Masatake Okumiya, a staff officer who studied combat reports, wrote after the war, "We could not accept that fighting spirit alone was not enough. Every report of P-38 superiority was met with calls for greater dedication, more aggressive spirit. We confused courage with ability. This cultural blindness stopped them from changing effectively." While American pilots kept improving tactics based on battle experience, Japanese training continued to focus on aerobatic skill and individual fighting ability, skills that were useless against an enemy that wouldn't fight on those terms. By mid-1944, some P-38s were fitted with early airborne radar for night fighting. This technology was completely beyond what Japan could match or counter. Night had once been a safe time for Japanese operations. Now even the dark offered no safety. While the P-38 did not fight directly in the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, its effect was seen in the quality of Japanese pilots who fought the U.S. Navy's Hellcats. Years of losses to P-38s and other American fighters had wiped out Japan's skilled pilots. The Marianas Turkey Shoot, where American pilots shot down over 300 Japanese planes with very few losses, was the end result of a process the P-38 had sped up. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, who led the Japanese carrier forces, later admitted, "Our pilots were not ready. They had neither the experience nor the aircraft to match the Americans. The war in the air had been lost long before that day." As 1944 became 1945, Japanese efforts to counter the P-38 grew more and more desperate. They tried ramming attacks, knowing that normal combat was hopeless. They created phosphorus anti-aircraft shells specifically to hit the P-38's fuel tanks. They even tried to build their own twin-engine fighters, though none were made in large numbers. The Kawasaki Ki-102, Japan's try at a twin-engine fighter like the P-38, showed the technology difference. While the P-38 had been in use since 1941, the Ki-102 didn't start service until 1945, and only 238 were built. It was slower than the P-38, climbed poorly, and had constant engine trouble. By early 1945, Japanese pilots no longer talked about air superiority or even being equal in the air. They talked about survival. The P-38, along with other American fighters, had gained total control over Japanese airspace. Saburo Sakai himself would later say that the P-38 destroyed the morale of the Zero fighter pilot. The numbers told the story. The P-38 operations in the Pacific showed overwhelming strength. Over 1,800 Japanese aircraft destroyed. Major Richard Bong with 40 victories, all in P-38s. Major Thomas Maguire with 38 victories, and P-38 pilots shooting down more Japanese planes than any other Army Air Force's fighter. Against these successes, Japanese loss rates told a sadder story. By the end of the war, Japan had lost over 90% of its skilled pilots who had started the war. The average Japanese pilot in 1945 had less than 100 hours of flying time. They were not warriors, but sacrifices sent against an enemy they had no chance of beating. After Japan surrendered, American forces interviewed many surviving Japanese pilots and commanders. These conversations revealed the full mental impact the P-38 had caused. Commander Masatake Okumiya admitted, "The P-38 broke our confidence completely. We had believed in our superiority, in our aircraft, in our training. The lightning showed us we were wrong about everything. It wasn't just faster or better armed. It represented a way of war we couldn't match." One Japanese pilot said, "On my first encounter with the P-38, I was shocked to find an American aircraft that could outrun, outclimb, and outdive our Zero, which we thought was the best fighter plane in the world." Technical studies after the war revealed the full extent of the mismatch. The Mitsubishi A6M Zero had a maximum speed of 332 mph, a service ceiling of 33,000 feet, and a climb rate of 3,100 ft per minute, dropping fast with height. Its range of 1,130 miles was impressive, but it carried weak armament, little ammo, no armor, and no self-sealing fuel tanks in early models. In contrast, the Lockheed P-38L Lightning exceeded 400 mph, reached 44,000 feet, and climbed at 4,650 EFT per minute. It carried heavy guns, had extensive pilot protection, and featured self-sealing tanks as standard. The Zero was built for a different era of combat, where agility and pilot skill mattered most, while the P-38 embodied industrial-age warfare, where technology, mass production, and constant innovation were decisive. The P-38's strength reflected American industrial power, which far outpaced Japan's. Lockheed built over 10,000 P-38s during the war, while Japan produced about the same number of Zeros over a longer time, with quality deteriorating as the war dragged on. American assembly line production, adapted from the car industry, churned out fighters faster than Japan could train pilots. Each P-38 contained thousands of precision parts, with Allison engines featuring advanced supercharging technology and interchangeable reliability. Japanese engines required hand-fitting and constant adjustments, slowing production and weakening combat readiness. By 1944, pilot training had also become a gulf. American P-38 pilots received specialized twin-engine training, over 100 hours in trainers before flying a Lightning. They practiced engine-out procedures, high-altitude physiology, gunnery with camera guns, and formation tactics. Japanese training by then had been reduced to 5,100 hours of basic instruction, with little combat training and a focus on spirit over strategy. Many were simply being prepared for kamikaze missions. American pilots entered combat as professionals. Japanese pilots entered as sacrifices. The P-38 forced a transformation in combat tactics. Classic turning dogfights, the standard since World War I, became obsolete. While the Zero could outturn a P-38 at low speeds, the Lightning's superior climb and speed made boom and zoom tactics devastating. American pilots perfected the high side pass, diving from above with guns blazing, then climbing away before the enemy could respond. Japanese formations and tactics crumbled against these energy fights. Even attempts to use layered altitude formations or cloud cover failed against the P-38's speed and range. Its appearance alone became psychological warfare. The P-38's strange twin-boom shape unnerved Japanese pilots, who at first thought it heavy and slow. Instead, it became a dreaded symbol of American air power. Rumors of P-38s in the area often led Japanese pilots to delay missions or demand escorts. They called it two planes, one pilot, reflecting both confusion and respect. Strategically, the P-38 reshaped Japanese war planning. Early hopes of winning through superior spirit collapsed against the Lightning's undeniable superiority. Regular air combat became hopeless, pushing Japan toward kamikaze missions, conserving its last skilled pilots for homeland defense, and abandoning offensive air operations by mid-1944. Admiral Soemu Toyoda admitted in October 1944, "We no longer have an air force that can do normal operations. The American fighters, especially the P-38, have taken away our ability to fight for the skies. Even maintenance and logistics became a battlefield where America triumphed." Despite its complexity, P-38 squadrons kept over 80% of their planes operational in the Pacific, while Japanese units struggled to maintain even half. American ground crews, many trained in civilian industries, introduced organized systems, specialized tools, and standard procedures. Japanese crews, relying on individual skill and tradition, could not match this efficiency. Navigation technology also tilted the balance. P-38s equipped with radio direction finding gear navigated accurately across vast oceans, striking with precision and returning safely even in poor weather. Japanese pilots still relied on dead reckoning and visual navigation, crippling long-range missions. The famous Yamamoto interception, flying 435 miles over open ocean to strike at exactly the right moment, would have been impossible for Japanese technology. The P-38 also devastated Japanese naval aviation. Carrier groups, painstakingly rebuilt after Midway, were again shattered by P-38s and other American fighters during island campaigns. By 1944, Japanese carriers often sailed with half-strength groups of poorly trained pilots. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa admitted before the Philippine Sea, "Our pilots are not ready for combat against American fighters. They can barely land on carriers, much less fight P-38s and Hellcats. We are sending them to certain death." This encounter forced a cultural reckoning. The Bushido Code, emphasizing spirit and personal skill, could not withstand American industrial might. Younger Japanese officers began questioning the very foundation of their military ideology. Survivors who returned from combat told stories that contradicted years of propaganda, describing American planes and technology as unbeatable. This shift helped drive Japan's post-war embrace of industry and technology. Economically, the contrast was stark. A single P-38 cost about $97,000 in 1944, yet America built thousands. Japan struggled to produce cheaper planes in meaningful numbers, with severe shortages of aluminum and precision instruments. The turbo-superchargers and constant-speed propellers of the Lightning represented levels of industrial sophistication Japan could not match. Perhaps the most powerful testimony came from Japanese pilots themselves. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai admitted, "The P-38 would patrol above the altitude at which the Zero could fly. Their great speed at high altitudes allowed them to maneuver into the most advantageous positions. Then the big fighters would plunge from the sky to smash into the hapless Zero fighters." Adding humiliation, the P-38's unarmed reconnaissance versions took 90% of aerial photographs in the Pacific. Japanese forces were constantly under surveillance, their movements and defenses mapped in detail. Fighters sent to intercept recon Lightnings rarely succeeded, as they simply could not reach their altitude. The shock of the Lightning's dominance left scars that lasted long after the war. Many Japanese pilots who survived became advocates for technological progress in post-war Japan, having learned painfully that courage without modern capability was futile. Sakai himself, who became a successful businessman, said, "The Lightning taught us that we must never again fall behind technologically. It showed us that industrial power, not warrior spirit, decides victory in modern war. The P-38's evolution reflected America's ability to adapt quickly. Dive flaps solved compressibility issues, cockpit heaters fixed freezing conditions, and power-assisted controls improved handling. Meanwhile, the Zero remained largely unchanged from Pearl Harbor to 1945. This disparity revealed the difference between a rigid wartime system and one fueled by constant innovation. General George Kenney summarized it best. The P-38 pilots flying at great height chose when and where they wanted to fight, with disastrous results for Japanese pilots. The results spoke for themselves. America's top two aces, Bong and Maguire, scored 78 kills between them, all in P-38s. Japan's top surviving ace ended the war with 64 victories accumulated over 6 years. The math of attrition doomed Japan. Ultimately, the P-38's dominance was not just about a better fighter plane. It symbolized an entirely different approach to war. The Japanese prepared for short wars won by courage and skill. The Americans prepared for long wars won by technology, production, and organization. The Lightning embodied modern warfare, and Japan's pilots faced not only an aircraft, but a future they could not stop. The human cost was immense. Thousands of young Japanese pilots with barely 100 hours of flight time were thrown into hopeless battles. Letters recovered after the war revealed their despair. One wrote, "Mother, I will face the twin-tailed devils tomorrow. I do not expect to return. They fly higher and faster than we can imagine. I will do my duty, but I know it is hopeless." He was killed over Rabaul in March 1944. His story was one of thousands, lives sacrificed to a war Japan could no longer fight. The Lightning's influence continued into the Cold War, inspiring twin-engine interceptors and shaping military doctrine centered on technological superiority. Japan's own post-war defense forces focused on quality and advanced systems, a direct result of their wartime trauma. The end of the Zero's dominance marked the end of an era. The age of the lone warrior pilot was over, replaced by industrialized air war. Saburo Sakai's reflection, that the P-38 destroyed the morale of the Zero fighter pilot, captured this shift. The Lightning did more than win battles. It shattered a worldview. The twin-tailed devil became the symbol of America's industrial and technological might, delivering lessons Japan would never forget. Sakai himself gave the final word. The P-38 taught us the hardest lesson of all, that the age of the samurai was over. In the skies over the Pacific, we met the future, and it destroyed us. The Japanese pilots who could not outrun or outclimb the P-38 Lightning learned this lesson at the cost of their lives, their aircraft, and their empire's ambitions. The Lightning was democracy's answer, delivered at 400 miles per hour from 30,000 feet with deadly precision no amount of bravery could defeat.